This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, have you got yourself that PR Podcast plug yet? You know, I mention this all the time. PR people, at least I am, terrible at promoting ourselves. We're great at promoting our clients, but when we start to talk about ourselves, we're like a deer in the headlights. So this is the easiest way that we PR people can plug who we are and what we do. And we love talking about people's not 9 to 5, right? Their side hustle, their passion project, your website, your blog, your TikTok. Maybe you're a guitar player. Maybe you're a chef. Send us that thing that you just love to do. Maybe you won an award. Oh, that would be good. You know, we had one guest write us that they won an award. Send us that stuff. Send us the stuff that lets us promote you and what you do and who you are, and maybe even send a little business your way. Who knows? DM us on Twitter or any of our social media platforms at the PR Podcast. Send us that thing that you just love that gets your juices flowing, and we will plug you at the top of an upcoming episode. Now on to our very special guest with us today. Let's get right into it. David McAlpine is Global Head of Public Relations at Illumina, a biotech company that makes DNA sequencing machines. Now, before that, he was the head of PR at General Motors, where he worked directly with the CEO. He's also been a network news TV producer, a network TV news producer. Did I say that right? He's a news guy. He's a TV news guy. He was with CBS This Morning, where he won an Emmy for Outstanding News Program. He specializes in boiling down complex ideas into consumable information that is suitable for either the mainstream or specialty media. And he's multi-lingual to boot. David, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jody.
So you and I share similar background, right? News guy turned PR guy.
I know.
What's the advantage to being in that position where you used to work on one side of the desk and now you're on the other side of the desk?
You know, I think the overarching advantage is you understand both sides of the crazy, right? Like if there's just a specific kind of crazy in news and there's a specific kind of crazy in PR. And if you can appreciate both, it does kind of like help you just manage expectations a little bit. But I mean, also it's kind of knowing both ends of the workflow, right? Like I've been in that conversation. I've been around that table where we talk about, you know, what's going on for the day, what's newsworthy. And then I've also been around the table where it's like, we've got this great new product coming out of this great new initiative. How do we maximize coverage? And so, you know, being able to bridge the gaps and also, as I like to say, you know, speak journalist. I think that's one of the challenging things that people have in PR and also in journalism, speak PR. Like there's a way to bridge the worlds. It's nice to have someone who's kind of fluent in both languages.
I love your description to understand the crazy on both sides, because it's true. I sometimes use the phrase juggling flaming chainsaws, but it's the same spirit, right? It's just,
yes.
If people knew what went on behind the scenes to get the product done, whether you're in the PR side or you're on the news side, they would just swear us off. But let's talk about your career journey and how you made the jump from TV, from broadcast news over to PR. What was the catalyst, or what was the thing that made you move over? And what was that journey like for you?
Well, I think like most of us, COVID forced us to rethink a lot about our lives in general, right? And you know, I spent 10 years in TV news. I was always the yes guy. I was always like, yes, I will work the weekend. Yes, I will work the overnight. Yes, I'll do this. You know, when I got into network news, because I started in local, but then when I started to be a field producer for the networks, you know, that is no holds barred. You know, when I worked in Washington, D.C. and I covered all of the important people, you know, you're jetting off to all these different places. And if you don't say no, yes means being on the road 240 days a year. Right. And it's fun. It's fun for a period of time, but there is an expiration date because none of us are meant to do that forever. So I think I started to hit my point where I just wanted to reevaluate what, you know, my 9 to 5 or, you know, my 12 to 9 or whatever the hours looked like. And I saw just a little bit of a difference in TV news and where the resources were going. And I wanted a new challenge. And so I started to look for spots in communications, and I kind of stumbled upon the position at General Motors. They were specifically looking for someone who had a background in broadcast. And I thought, okay, it's a Fortune 25 company. They have a really cool product line, right? Like they've got cars that you can't, it's great to, work with cars because it's tangible, it's there. And they're America's largest automaker. So why not give this a shot? So, I talked it through with my then bosses. It seemed like the great fit. I'm originally from Chicago, so I kind of understood that Midwest mentality of a lot of the Detroiters and Michiganders that I worked with at GM. And it just kind of felt like home, like after working on both coasts, I was like, okay, like Midwestern grit, like here we go. And it was a great transition. But it was a little bit bumpy for me just mentally because I had to shift my entire thought process, right? Like, it was trying to understand a very complicated corporate structure on top of working in corporate communications for the first time. And so while I was super happy I made the switch, it's funny because my career has always been sink or swim opportunities, right? Like I moved to Seattle at 22 in a really big market doing a very fast-paced morning show. I really could have screwed up. And it was a sink or swim opportunity, and I swum, and it was great, and then that's kind of how I found my way through my career. And this was another one of those opportunities where I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew that the end result could be great. So I figured, why not give it a shot?
Now, it's interesting that you went inside straight from news, you went to inside PR, corporate comms, as opposed to agency PR.
Right.
And me having been on both sides, I find that agency sort of more closely reflects the attitude of the newsroom as opposed to internal corporate. I'm a bit of a cowboy, and so I don't do well with rules.
Right.
And so the couple of times that I've been inside internal PR or corporate communications, I haven't done as well as I've done on the agency side. What was your experience?
I think it's funny that you mentioned that because I would agree with that. And I've never been on the agency side. And actually, when I was interviewing for several in-house positions, trying to leave CBS or just, move on with my career, a lot of the feedback that I got was I didn't have that agency experience that they were looking for, which I thought was funny, right? Because I was like, what better agency experience than working in a newsroom on, all these national outlets that you guys want to get into, right? And I think for me, the idea of going into an agency was actually a little daunting because it was so undefined. Like, like if you go work for one of the big name agencies, you don't really know what kind of accounts you're going to be working on. You don't really know where you're going to end up. And while that's exciting, I thought, okay, if I'm going to make this jump and I'm going to really transition my lifestyle and my thinking, I wanted to be in a place where I could at least have some kind of guardrails and definition. I quickly learned that at GM, because it's a huge company and it's going through a massive pivot right now, those guardrails weren't as strict as I thought they would be because we crossed all spans, like I had to learn all the legacy auto stuff, but then there's so much tech stuff going on there. It kind of knew no bounds. And I really had to work very closely with our fantastic agency partners. But, I kind of wanted just a little bit of definition. And that was what was exciting to me about it.
That's interesting. That's and that's terrific that you recognize that about your personality and how you made it fit that opportunity. But you got thrown right into the fire too, right? I mean, you're working with the CEO, you're working at the top level.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny because I came into a company that, was not necessarily broadcast friendly. I'd gotten a lot of feedback that the company was, a little media shy, and understandably so. If you look at GM over the past 20 years, the recession hit the company really hard. You had the ignition switch issue in 2015. So, the company has gone through a lot of ups and downs, but I came in at a time when, EVs are one of the biggest talking points in Washington, across the country, whether you like them or whether you don't. But it's a talking point, right? And so my point was, we can really punch at our own weight here. We are, again, America's biggest automaker. Like, let's not lose sight of that, right? And so, it took a second to get people used to what we could do on television. But then once I started showing the results of of what we can do on television, then it just all kind of opened up, right? Because then everyone saw all of the really great things that can come of it. And not to knock print, because I work really closely with a lot of print colleagues now, but when you're talking about a car and you're talking about, like, our main message was get in an EV and we'll show you it's a better car. That's a really hard thing to convey in a Wall Street Journal article, a New York Times article, a Wired article, Fast Company. But if you show it on NBC News, that's show it, tell it right there. Like, that's basic PR. And so I think people saw, like, the lights start to click with people when we were getting our executives and our products on television a lot more. And so then that kind of followed. And then you're right, the fire just only got bigger from there, because I was there for some pretty seminal moments in the company too. But it was, it was crazy, but it was fun.
Are there moments along that journey where you looked at what you were dealing with and sort of what you had to the challenges you had to face, and you're drawing on your TV experience, you're drawing on your broadcast experience? I'm sure you are every day, but are there some specific moments that you can recall? You're like, wow, I wouldn't know this if not.
Oh yeah. So we had our first big post-COVID event was when we opened up our electric vehicle factory in Detroit in November of last year, November 2021. And it was this whole big production. Like, we finally got to do stuff on a plant floor. It's a really fun working in a manufacturing environment because everyone is so passionate about it, right? So we had all these, like, we had the Hummer EV was the big product at the time. It can crab walk, it can move to the side, it can move diagonally, they go fast. Like, it's a really cool car vehicle. I've learned it's vehicle, not car, because it's a super truck, actually. Use the correct terminology. But then we found out, I think 4 days beforehand, that the President Biden was going to come visit as well. So all of a sudden, everything had to unwind, because, when the president comes to town, then you have a whole added layer of stuff, right? You have security, you have timing. Like, all of a sudden, it's not just your event, it's your event plus President Biden's coming. So, I working and having covered the White House, I kind of was able to prep everyone for, like, what was to come, because I remember it happened on a Thursday, we found out, and we had to move the event back a day. And I was prepping everyone, like, here's how it's going to look like over the weekend. I flew to Detroit the next day, and I was like, you guys, the White House press office is going to come in and they're going to say, we got to do this, this, and that. And so it was just kind of preparing everyone for, like,
yeah, you're going to turn everything upside down.
Crazy
right?
that was about to come. The other thing was, though, that I fought to keep was we were ringing the New York Stock Exchange opening bell that day. It was the first time we'd rung the bell since the company re-IPO'd post-bankruptcy in 2009 or 2010, whenever that was. And that's something that I had pitched because when I was a local news producer in Seattle, we always hit the bell at 6:30 in the morning, because it was, like, part of our strategy to, like, show that there's active things going on. And that was the thing on the West Coast that I always loved, was I was like, oh, it's 6:30, but the day's getting started in New York. That was kind of like my fixation on the East Coast. So when we were thinking big about this, I was like, why don't we bring the opening bell to Detroit, to the floor of the factory? And everyone naysayed it at first. They were kind of like, oh, well, I don't know about that. But then buzz started to build. And then we actually did it with, like, the live countdown. And it's really simple TV, as I'm sure you know. Everyone loves a countdown. Everyone loves like that buzz beforehand. And then there's that moment, and then it all kind of rushes away. But it's a big moment. And that's kind of what I took from my TV news experience, was, like, how to build these really big, fun moments that, last a little bit, but the tail can last a lifetime.
It's so funny you mentioned that. It's similar to a ribbon cutting, right?
Yes.
Which in PR is like, oh my God, we're going to do another ribbon cutting, really? But it is such a simple concept that media, and especially visual media, photographers, videographers, can wrap their brains around and point their camera at and say, here's action, here's this thing that's happening. It still works.
Right.
And I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and ribbon cutting still, got to jazz them up. You got to make them, you got to give them a little bit more, something more. But I'm hearing that's the NASDAQ bell, I'm sorry, the stock exchange bell, really similar to that ribbon cutting effect.
It was the same thing. And I mean, like, I always said this to my team, it was the first, the biggest, the only. Like, that's what we learned in journalism school, right? Like, if something is the first, the biggest, the only. that's automatically makes it newsworthy. And not only was this our, one of our biggest, well, first of all, it was our only factory in the city of Detroit. It was one of the only automotive manufacturing facilities in the city of Detroit. It was our first electric vehicle manufacturing plant. Like, there were so many first and onlys, and then you add the president coming, you had a bet, like, I mean, it's like, what else, what more could you ask for, right? Now, I will say, would I want to go through that crazy again? Absolutely not. That was 5 days of like, that was a lot. It was a really busy 5 to 6 days to plan for that, and just a lot of build up to it. And then adding on top of it, coming out of COVID, that was the company's like coming out of COVID party, right? Like, we're back in person, and we had manufacturing employees on the floor for a while, but this was like the first time that we had a lot of people in a room at once doing something big. Yeah, it was a really fun moment though.
Very cool. Very cool. Now let's talk about how you transition that experience,
Yes,
plus the broadcast experience, into what you're doing now with Illumina. Am I pronouncing it right?
Illumina.
Illumina. Sorry,
Yeah.
I got it right in the intro. I
No,
got
it's
it
okay.
right. I got it wrong there. But this is very complex stuff. I mean, right? So tell me about, first of all, tell me about the company, and then tell us about sort of what you do with them and how you get press for something that I would think that most people go, "Ooh, that's cool," but then when you get into it, sort of their eyes glaze over because they can't understand what it is.
Right. So, well, Illumina is a company that makes DNA sequencing machines. So a lot of us may know the basics of DNA from AP biology or biology in high school, Punnett squares, ACTG, all the bases that make up kind of what is all of us. It's the human genome. It's kind of the map of our bodies and our beings. And so the way that I like to put it is, there's a difference between genetics and genomics, and that genetics is kind of the study of the hereditary part of where you came from, and the genomics is what makes up who you are. And so our machines at different levels enable researchers, clinics, labs to make these breakthroughs and empower information that we get from the genome to help make, life-changing decisions. We're talking, the fight in cancer, the fight against rare diseases, agricultural things, like making a more resilient crop in climate change, changing, making UTIs, which I found out is one of the most common infections in healthcare associated settings, lessening those across the US, and people worry about sending their parents to nursing homes. Like, that's a legit concern. So it's really, there are so many applications for genomics and the information that we can get from that. And our machines enable other people to make those breakthroughs in making the applications that can really affect our daily lives.
So go
sorry,
ahead. No, I was going to say, so as you're pitching these stories out,
yeah.
Are you taking the big science that you just described and sort of boiling it down to specific cases, like, here, this thing can do this, and let's talk about this specific thing? How are you going about finding stories, and how are you going about pitching stories and connecting with the reporters that are going to be interested in them?
Absolutely. Well, so it's funny because GM and Illumina kind of have the same thread in that, GM had the auto beat and Illumina has the biotech beat. So I'm already working with a group of reporters who are already very focused and very knowledgeable on the biotech industry, the biotech sphere. And I mean, incredibly tapped into what's happening in genomics, especially if you're out on the West Coast, San Diego, which is where Illumina is headquartered. It's a big tech hub, genomics hub. Boston is the same way. That's kind of the bi-coastal area of biotech. But it's kind of understanding, like, I kind of tier it in my head, like 30,000 foot view, 10,000 foot view, 5,000 foot view, and then at the surface in terms of where the literacy of people is. So I can understand when we do have a story, where it might fit in that tiered system, and then also how to just think outside the box a little bit, right? Like, it's a little bit different in that, our machines enable applications. So we're not B2C, we're B2B. But, kind of seeing the application through and then understanding, okay, where would the press fall in that B2C function that we don't necessarily touch, but we enable? And how do I get that to kind of transfer down? So it's kind of a two-step process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And that sort of segues segues into what I was wondering is that you said you talked about the B2B application and the fact that you're working with reporters who are well versed in this subject matter area, and that's great. Do you ever attempt to communicate with mainstream reporters, maybe on a topic where, you know, they're writing something that is, I'll use the phrase more pedestrian or more sort of homegrown, as opposed to something that's firmly in tech? And how are you making that jump?
Yeah, I mean, all the time we're thinking about how do we go bigger, because this does really tie into the idea of precision medicine, which, you know, President Obama presented when he was in office. President Biden has made it a big cornerstone of his administration as well, especially the Cancer Moonshot Initiative. So it's finding those applications that kind of affect more people. Like I said, cancer is something that affects far too many Americans. And it's something that oncology is something that's top of mind for how Illumina can help in that space. You know, and so it's kind of, again, understanding the wider application. And then, you know, really making sure that my executives are enabled to talk about it in a friendly way. You know, but I mean, the other benefit that we have is, you know, we're a Fortune 1000 company, so we're a pretty big publicly traded company. So by virtue of that, you know, the business media is interested in us and what we're doing, and we are a global leader in genomics. So kind of people see us as the marker for where the industry is going as a whole. But the fun part of that is, you know, I see what we do is not only pushing Illumina, but pushing genomics as a whole. And that's really important, right? And everyone can get behind that. So it's kind of knowing when to speak about Illumina and knowing when to speak about this industry is getting bigger, and here's why that's important.
And as part of what you're doing for them, as part of that subject matter experts injecting your people into stories that are getting written about the topic, or are you strictly focused on what the company does and sort of pushing those proactive narratives?
I think it's both. I'm very fortunate to have a bevy of subject matter experts at that I get to work with every single day at Illumina, who are both great internally and externally. So I always operate under a no dumb questions policy. Like I've got my people who I can like Teams message or email or call, and they are all willing to sit down with me and explain in layman's terms, or at least I can try to get it into my head, the layman's terms of what's going on. But then they're also really great and kind of fearless, which is awesome, right? Because there is a lot of fear sometimes involved in media. But I got a lot of people who are pretty fearless and very gung-ho about, you know, really preaching the power of genomics and what it can do and where it goes. And, you know, it's understanding kind of like where, you know, one level of SMEs would sit versus, you know, where my executives can go. And everyone's got a really great story to tell and a great personal aspect too, which is really nice.
You know, I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm not as much of a nerd as I want to be. There's always more stuff that I can learn, right? But when it comes to tech and stuff like this, I'm all in the tank, and you know, I'm encouraging my kids to be studying math and science. Even if they don't go into that, they've got to know it, because I think as a country, we need to be better in math and science.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much opportunity out there. I mean, we can't even predict the opportunities that are going to be 10 years down the line, maybe even 5 years down the line.
No.
But for guys like you and me who have a background in journalism, who then switch over into PR, is there a personality type that you need to get into the kind of work that you're doing now? I mean, who's best suited to do PR for a tech company like Illumina?
You know, I think you need to have kind of a gentle approach. I mean, you and I have probably both worked with people on the PR side who are like really at like a 12 all the time, right? And those people are awesome. They keep the morale up. They, you know, and they do a lot of really great things. But and sometimes I can be at a 12, right? Like I just had 2 Red Bulls today, so I'm kind of flying high right now. But you know, and so I can be at that level, but I know that when I approach, and I learned this through working at GM too. Like I worked with a lot of engineers at GM, and now I work with a lot of really smart scientists at Illumina. Literally, like throw a dart, you'll hit PhD, Ivy League, like really smart people. I think it's learning to meet them at their level, but then also be engaging and willing to learn. and then willing to work with them to kind of get it to a point where you're both happy with it. It's being open to hearing what they have to say and what they think is important. So it's almost, I don't approach them with, this is what the story is. I say, this is what I think the story is, but you tell me if I'm wrong or right. And being able to openly, have that conversation with them. So that's why I say, like, if you're kind of at a 12 and you're really like, because there are some people who are, really great at the pushing and the bugging journalists, because that is an art of its own, right? That energy, I don't think really works in the STEM field because of the personalities that do really well in that industry on the technical side. And then on the flip side, you've got some really great logistical minds in PR who can, plan events as, the day is long, right? They can put together a great run of show. They can put together a budget. I am not good with money. That is not my forte. My boss would kill me for saying that, but it's true. Budgets are not my favorite. Again, I don't think that that personality type would also not do well, because it's you sometimes have to pull the thread out. So it's like, it's a happy medium in terms of just meeting them in the middle. In a way, it's almost like interviewing them. And I think that's why I found some success in it, is because I've interviewed so many people who I'd never met before, and you have to meet them at their level and get them comfortable enough to talk about it on camera. So I'm removing the camera from the situation, but still trying to treat it with that gentle care that I would in like, even in an MOS situation, yeah.
It's a fascinating field, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about it, David. We are going to wrap up our conversation there, but maybe we'll have you back to talk more about this, because I'm sure 6 months from now there's going to be something brand new in this field, and you're going to have to explain it to us, right?
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to segue now, though, into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio, ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions. These are meant to elicit a simple answer, maybe a laugh or two, David. So with your indulgence, here we go.
Sure.
Rapid fire question number 1. What is your favorite news source?
TMZ. But if we're being like, TMZ is my first stop of the day. But then if not, it's the New York Times.
Great stuff. Rapid fire question number 2. What's your favorite social media platform?
TikTok. I spend way too much time on it.
It is. I am in the tank on the TikTok. And I've just been trying to figure it out. I'm better than I was a couple of months ago, but I still watch some of these folks, and not just the silly dance folks, but like, people are really creative on there if you're watching the right stuff.
It's an art form. I love it.
Really great. Rapid fire question number 3, coffee or alcohol? You already talked about the Red Bull.
Well, I was going to say it's both. Yeah, I've been known to combine the two, but I would say I am a heavy user of both.
There we go. Rapid fire question number 4. What's your favorite on the run food?
If I'm trying to be good, it would be like a sweet green or like a bowl. But nothing beats like a really good slice of pizza.
There you go. That's the right answer. I love it. Rapid fire question number 5. What do you want to be after you finish this career?
Oh, that's a great, I don't know. I've had so many, this is such a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've had so many iterations of my career. I've just learned that, like, I've planned, and then all the plans go to bust. So it's like, why even plan anymore? Like, what I really have tried to focus on, and this is my mantra for 2023, is live in the moment.
I love that. That sounds like good advice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, David. This has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you online.
Sure. So my website is davidmcalpine.com. My email, I'll give my work one if anyone wants to reach out and learn more about Illumina. It's dmcalpine@illumina.com. And then I'm on Twitter at David McAlpine. You can reach me, DM me, all the things. I'm also very active on LinkedIn if you search my name, but more than happy to meet, greet, connect, all the things.
That sounds great. Thanks for your time, David, today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Apple. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.